The last golden rays of sunlight danced across the dusty town square of Silver Creek as Nora Thatcher stood trembling on the crude wooden auction block, her face streaked with tears that sparkled like diamonds in the dying light. The year was 1879, and human decency seemed as scarce as water in this forgotten corner of the Arizona Territory. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin, a stark reminder of how quickly life could change for a woman alone in the West. $5 for this one, drawled the auctioneer, a greasy-haired man with tobacco-stained teeth. Young, strong, and she can read, might be useful for keeping your books or warming your bed. Crude laughter rippled through the crowd of men. Nora kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to meet the hungry eyes that appraised her like livestock. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been a schoolteacher in Boston. Now, after the stagecoach robbery that had left her penniless and alone, she was being sold to pay for her room and board debts. $7, called a voice from the back. 10, countered another. The bidding continued, each increase in price feeling like another nail in the coffin of Nora's freedom. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, determined not to give them the satisfaction of hearing her beg. $15, called a gruff voice from the back of the crowd. The auctioneer's eyes lit up. $15 for the lady. Do I hear 20? A man with a pockmarked face and whiskey breath leaned in closer. $20, and I'll take her now. Nora's stomach twisted as the man reached out to touch her hair. She jerked away, earning herself a harsh slap from the auctioneer. Stand still, girl. Your merchandise now. A tense silence fell over the crowd as the sound of spurs jingling against wooden planks cut through the evening air. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure moving toward the auction block. Dust-covered and trail-worn, the stranger's face was partially obscured by the brim of a weathered Stetson, but Nora could make out a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. "That's enough," the newcomer said, his voice quiet but commanding. The auctioneer sneered. "This is a legal auction, mister. The lady owes debts, and this is how she's paying them." The stranger reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He emptied its contents into his palm, a handful of coins and a crumpled dollar bill. $23.57, he said, extending his hand. "Every last cent I have. She's mine now." The auctioneer counted the money, a smirk playing on his lips. "Sold to the cowboy with the empty pockets." As the stranger approached the block, Nora finally saw his eyes green as spring grass after rain, but hard as emeralds. He pulled a knife from his belt and she flinched, but he only cut the ropes binding her wrists. "Name's Ethan Xavier," he said quietly. "And don't worry, madam, I didn't buy you, I bought your freedom." The setting sun bathed them in amber light as he helped her down from the block, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. For the first time in weeks, Nora felt a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. "Why?" she whispered. Ethan Xavier's eyes met hers and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a promise. "Because some things shouldn't be for sale," he answered simply. "Not in this world or any other." As they walked away from the auction block, Nora couldn't help but wonder what price she would ultimately pay for this unexpected rescue. Freedom, she was learning, was rarely free in the West, and debt, once created, always demanded payment of one kind or another. The saloon's raucous noise faded behind them as Ethan led Nora toward the edge of town. The twilight was deepening into full darkness, and the first stars were appearing in the vast expanse above Silver Creek. "Where are we going?" Nora asked, trying to keep pace with his long strides. "My camp," Ethan replied, slowing a bit to accommodate her. "It's just outside town. I've got coffee and beans, and you look like you could use both." Nora's stomach rumbled at the mention of food. The boarding house owner had kept her on starvation rations for days before deciding to sell her to cover her mounting debts. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Xavier," she said, her voice still shaky, "but I'm not sure what happens now. I have nothing, no money, no belongings." "Nothing to repay your kindness." Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the growing darkness. "I didn't help you expecting payment, miss." Thatcher, Nora Thatcher, Miss Thatcher, I did what any decent man would do, she laughed bitterly. I've seen precious little decency since arriving in the West, Mr. Xavier. They reached a small clearing where a modest camp was set up. A sorrel horse was tethered nearby, grazing contentedly. A bedroll was laid out near the remains of a small fire, and saddlebags rested against a fallen log. Ethan busied himself rekindling the fire, and soon a cheerful blaze was pushing back the night's chill. He filled a battered coffee pot with water from his canteen and set it to boil. "How did you end up on that auction block?" he asked, as he rummaged through his saddlebags for the promised beans. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "I came west to take a teaching position in Tucson. The school board sent fare for the stagecoach, but we were robbed 3 days out from Silver Creek. The bandits took everything: my trunk, my purse, even the locket my mother gave me." Ethan listened silently as he prepared their simple meal. "When we reached town, I had nothing to pay for lodging or food. The proprietor of the boarding house agreed to let me stay until I could wire home for money, but when my letters went unanswered, his patience ran out." She blinked back tears. Today was his solution. Ethan handed her a tin cup of coffee and a plate of beans. "Eat," he said gently. "Things always look bleaker on an empty stomach." Nora accepted the food gratefully, trying not to appear too ravenous as she ate. "I'm headed to Tucson myself," Ethan said after a while. "I can escort you there if you still want that teaching position." Nora looked up from her plate. "Why would you do that? You've already spent your last dollar on me." In the firelight, his features softened slightly. "I've got a job waiting at a ranch outside Tucson. The Circle P good pay, and they won't mind if I'm a few days late, especially if I explain why." He took a sip of his coffee. "Besides, a man traveling alone attracts trouble. A man traveling with a woman might just be left alone. Or it might make you more of a target," Nora countered. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I can handle myself, Miss Thatcher." For the first time, she noticed the worn Colt revolver at his hip. The way he carried it spoke of familiarity, but not the casual menace she'd seen in the town's gunslingers. "What were you before you became a cowboy, Mr. Xavier?" she asked. "Many things," he replied vaguely. "Army scout. Freight driver. For a while, I delivered mail for the Pony Express. And now I'm a man who's tired of drifting." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks flying into the night sky. "The Circle P is offering steady work and a chance to put down roots. Something I haven't had in a long time." They fell into a companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the night creatures beginning their evening chorus. Nora finished her meal, feeling strength returning to her limbs. "You should get some sleep," Ethan said finally. "I'll keep watch." "But where will you sleep?" He gestured to the ground near the fire. "I've slept on worse than dirt, Miss Thatcher." Nora hesitated. "I can't take your bedroll. You can and you will," he said firmly. "You've had a harder day than me, and tomorrow will be long. We need to put distance between us and Silver Creek. Some of those men at the auction didn't look happy to lose their bid." The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the night air. Reluctantly, she settled onto the bedroll, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin. "Mr. Xavier," she said as he took up a position with his back against a tree, his rifle across his knees. "Why did you really help me today?" In the flickering firelight, his expression was solemn. "My mother was sold like that once, back in Texas after my father died. A neighbor took pity and bought her freedom." He looked away into the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "I swore if I ever saw such a thing again, I'd do the same." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm sorry about your mother." She found happiness again, eventually. "Taught me that even the darkest days can lead to brighter ones." He touched the brim of his hat. "Get some sleep, Miss Thatcher. Dawn comes early out here." As Nora drifted toward sleep, her last conscious thought was that perhaps there was still decency to be found in the West after all, embodied in this quiet man who'd spent his last dollar to save a stranger. Morning arrived with the harsh brilliance unique to the desert. Nora woke to find Ethan already up, tending to his horse and preparing a simple breakfast of hardtack and jerky. Not much of a meal, he apologized, handing her a portion, but it'll keep us going until we reach the next town. How far is it? Nora asked, wincing as she stretched. Despite the bedroll, her body ached from the stress and fear of the previous day. Copper Springs is about 20 miles south. Small place, but they've got a decent inn where we can get a proper meal. He hesitated. I've got friends there who might help us out until we reach Tucson. Nora nodded, grateful for his planning. As she ate, she noticed Ethan studying a worn map, his brow furrowed in concentration. Is something wrong? She asked. He folded the map carefully. Just checking our route. There's been trouble with Apache raiders in the territory. Most stick to the mountains, but it pays to be cautious. The mention of Apache raiders sent a fresh wave of fear through Nora. The Eastern newspapers were full of sensationalized stories about Indian attacks, though she'd always suspected them of exaggeration. Are they really as dangerous as people say? She asked. Ethan sighed. Some are, some aren't. Like white men, they've got their share of good and bad. He began packing up their camp. But these aren't peaceful times between our peoples, and 2 travelers alone make an easy target. When everything was packed, Ethan helped Nora mount his horse. You're not riding, she asked, surprised. We'll take turns, he explained. Horse can't carry us both all day in this heat. We'll make better time this way. And so they set out, Nora on horseback while Ethan walked beside, leading the animal by its reins. The morning was cool, but the sun climbed quickly, promising another scorching day. The landscape was both beautiful and brutal: red rock formations, scrubby brush, and cacti stretching to the horizon. As they traveled, Nora found herself watching Ethan. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard living, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. There was something reassuring about his vigilance, even as it reminded her of the dangers they faced. Tell me about Boston, he said after they'd been traveling for an hour or so. I've never been east of the Mississippi. Grateful for the distraction, Nora described her hometown, the cobblestone streets, the harbor filled with ships from around the world, the libraries and theaters and busy marketplaces. Ethan listened attentively, asking questions that revealed a keen intelligence and curiosity. It sounds like paradise, he said when she finished. It has its problems too, she admitted, but I miss it sometimes, especially now. Why did you leave? He asked. Teaching jobs can't be scarce in a city like that. Nora's hands tightened on the reins. My father remarried after my mother died. His new wife didn't appreciate having a grown stepdaughter in the house. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Tucson, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to start fresh. Family can be complicated, Ethan agreed. My father drank himself to death after the war, left my mother with 3 children and more debt than she could handle. You mentioned she found happiness again. A small smile softened his features. A widower with a small ranch took her in, treated her like a queen until the day she died. Treated us kids well too. Where are your siblings now? Sisters married to a shopkeeper in San Francisco. Brother died at Gettysburg. The simple statement, delivered without emotion, spoke volumes about the losses that had shaped this man. Before Nora could offer condolences, Ethan stiffened, his hand moving to his revolver. What is it? She whispered, suddenly alert. Dust cloud about a mile back, he said, his voice tight. Could be nothing, could be trouble. Either way, we need to pick up the pace. He urged the horse into a trot, keeping his hand on the animal's flank as they moved more quickly across the rugged terrain. Nora clung to the saddle, fear churning in her stomach. If it's trouble, Ethan said without breaking stride, you take the horse and ride for Copper Springs. Follow the trail, we're on, it leads straight there. I can't leave you behind, she protested. You can and you will, he replied firmly. I didn't spend my last dollar freeing you just to see you captured again. The dust cloud grew larger, and soon they could make out riders, 5 of them, moving fast and deliberately in their direction. Ethan swore under his breath. Not Apache, he said. Worse, I recognize the lead rider, name's Jeb Harker. Was at the auction yesterday, bidding on you before I stepped in. Nora felt the blood drain from her face. What do they want? Nothing good. Ethan's expression was grim as he helped her down from the horse. Change of plan, they've spotted us, and that horse isn't fast enough to outrun them. He led her quickly off the trail toward a jumble of large boulders. Stay low and out of sight, he instructed, helping her into a narrow space between two rocks. No matter what happens, don't come out until they're gone. Ethan, please, trust me, Nora. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his tone made her obey without further argument. She watched as he positioned himself among the rocks, rifle ready, but not yet visible. His posture was relaxed, but she could sense the coiled tension beneath his calm exterior. The riders approached, slowing as they neared the boulders. Jeb Harker was easily identifiable by his size, a bear of a man with a bushy beard and cruel eyes. The others were cut from the same cloth, hard men with harder expressions. Well, well, Harker called out. If it ain't the hero from yesterday's auction. Where's your pretty purchase, Xavier? Ethan stepped partially into view, keeping the rifle lowered but ready. She's not my purchase, Harker, and she's not here. Harker laughed, an ugly sound. Now why don't I believe that? You paid good money for her. I paid for her freedom, Ethan replied evenly. She's gone her own way. One of Harker's companions spat tobacco juice onto the ground. You expect us to believe you spent your last dollar on a woman and then just let her walk away? I don't much care what you believe, Ethan said, but you're wasting your time here. Harker dismounted, his hand resting on his gun belt. Here's the thing, Xavier, that woman was promised to me before you showed up. Old man Jenkins at the boarding house and I had an arrangement. Sounds like you should take it up with Jenkins. I did. Harker's grin revealed tobacco-stained teeth. He's mighty sorry about it, almost as sorry as you're going to be. From her hiding place, Nora could see the other men spreading out, trying to flank Ethan's position. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain they would hear it. Last chance to walk away, Harker, Ethan warned, his voice deceptively calm. I don't think so. Harker's hand moved toward his gun. What happened next was so fast Nora could barely follow it. Ethan's rifle came up in one fluid motion, and a shot cracked across the desert. Harker howled, clutching his arm where blood was already soaking through his sleeve. Next one won't be a warning, Ethan called out, already moving to a different position among the rocks. Two of Harker's men opened fire, their bullets ricocheting off stone. Ethan returned fire, and one of the men tumbled from his saddle with a cry of pain. The others scattered for cover, dragging the wounded Harker with them. This ain't over, Xavier, Harker shouted. That woman's mine. I paid Jenkins fair and square for her. You can't buy a person, Ethan replied, his voice carrying across the distance. Not in this territory, not while I'm breathing. A tense standoff ensued, with occasional gunfire exchanged but no clear advantage on either side. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly on the rocks where Nora hid, fear and thirst making her light-headed. Then, unexpectedly, the sound of multiple horses approaching from the south reached them. Harker and his remaining men tensed, looking toward the new threat. Cavalry patrol, one of them hissed. We gotta go, Jeb, Harker cursed viciously. This ain't finished, Xavier. I'll find you in Tucson. The men retreated hastily, helping their injured companion onto his horse before galloping away to the north. Ethan remained in position, rifle ready, until they were well out of sight. Only then did he return to Nora's hiding place. Are you all right? He asked, helping her out from between the rocks. She nodded, though her legs felt weak beneath her. How did you know the cavalry was coming? Ethan's lips quirked in a small smile. I didn't. But those weren't cavalry horses, just a trading caravan heading to Copper Springs. Harker and his boys aren't looking for witnesses, though, so they ran. Sure enough, when they made their way back to the trail, they could see a line of wagons in the distance, moving slowly but steadily in their direction. Perfect timing, Ethan remarked, looking relieved despite his casual tone. We can travel with them to Copper Springs, safety in numbers. As they waited for the caravan to reach them, Nora studied Ethan's face. Despite his composed exterior, she could see the tension in his jaw, the watchfulness that hadn't left his eyes. You were willing to die for me back there, she said quietly, a woman you barely know. Ethan met her gaze, and for a moment, she glimpsed something beneath his guarded expression, a depth of feeling that startled her. Some things are worth fighting for, Miss Thatcher, he said simply. Freedom is one of them. The caravan drew closer, and Ethan raised a hand in greeting. As the lead wagon approached, Nora found herself wondering what kind of man would risk everything for a stranger's liberty. And more troubling still, why her heart raced whenever he said her name. The caravan leader, a grizzled trader named Samuel Hollies, welcomed them warmly after Ethan explained a simplified version of their situation. By mid-afternoon, they were traveling with the 5-wagon convoy, their horse tethered behind the lead wagon while they rode inside. Been trading in these parts for 15 years, Hollies told them, offering a canteen of water. Used to be more peaceful before the war, now everybody's got an itchy trigger finger and a grudge to settle. The inside of the wagon was crowded with trade goods, bolts of cloth, tools, canned foods, and other supplies destined for the remote settlements of the territory. Nora sat on a crate, grateful for the shade despite the wagon's constant jolting over the rough trail. Your friend there has the look of a man who's seen his share of trouble, Hollies remarked to Nora, nodding toward Ethan, who was walking alongside the wagon, scanning the horizon. We've only just met, Nora admitted. He helped me when I needed it most, Hollies chuckled. That's how it starts, Missy. Most good marriages in these parts begin with a rescue of some kind or another. Life's too harsh out here to waste time on long courtships. Nora felt her cheeks flush. It's not like that. Mr. Xavier is simply escorting me to Tucson, where I'm to be a schoolteacher. If you say so, Hollies replied, clearly unconvinced. But I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching, like a man who's found something he thought was lost forever. Before Nora could protest further, Ethan climbed into the wagon, settling himself on a crate opposite her. His presence seemed to fill the small space, and she found herself noticing details she'd missed before: a small scar above his left eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he almost smiled. Hollies says we'll reach Copper Springs by sundown, he told her. The trail ahead is clear so far. Good news indeed, she replied, trying to ignore Hollies' knowing glance. I confess I'm looking forward to sleeping in a real bed tonight. A shadow passed over Ethan's face. About that, I need to be honest with you, Miss Thatcher. I truly did spend my last dollar at that auction. I can get us food from my friends in Copper Springs, but I can't afford a hotel room. Nora's heart sank. The prospect of another night under the stars, especially with Harker and his men potentially still pursuing them, was daunting. Don't you worry about that, Hollies interjected cheerfully. My sister runs the inn at Copper Springs. She's always got a room for friends of mine, especially pretty school teachers and their protective cowboys. We couldn't impose, Nora began. Nonsense, Hollies waved away her objection. Mabel's been complaining about needing help with the books. You mentioned you can read and write. You work for her for a day while your man here helps me unload the wagons, and we'll call it even. Ethan and Nora exchanged glances. That's very generous, Ethan said carefully. But I should clarify that Miss Thatcher and I aren't details, Hollies interrupted with a laugh. Out here, it's what you do that matters, not what you call yourselves. And what you did was save this young lady from a terrible fate. That makes you good people in my book. The conversation turned to other topics as the wagon train continued its slow progress toward Copper Springs. Nora found herself stealing glances at Ethan when he wasn't looking. There was something compelling about him, not just his handsome features, but the quiet strength he radiated, the sense of absolute reliability. As the afternoon wore on, the terrain began to change. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. The air cooled slightly, carrying the scent of sage after the day's heat. Almost there, Hollies announced as they rounded a bend in the trail. Copper Springs came into view, a small settlement nestled in a shallow valley. Unlike Silver Creek's haphazard sprawl, this town had a more orderly appearance, with neat buildings arranged along a main street. A church steeple rose above the other structures, and gardens were visible behind several homes. Looks peaceful, Nora remarked, relief evident in her voice. It is mostly, Hollies agreed. Town was founded by Quakers originally. They're gone now, but they left their mark. No saloon, for one thing, makes for quieter nights. As they approached the town, several people came out to greet the wagons. Hollies waved enthusiastically, calling out names and news to the townsfolk. They rolled to a stop in front of a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Copper Springs Inn and Dining. A robust woman with Hollies' same ruddy complexion emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. "About time you showed up, Samuel. I was beginning to think the Apache got you. Now, Mabel, you know they don't want my scalp, too little hair to bother with." Hollies climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for his age. "Got some guests for you. This here's Miss Thatcher, a schoolteacher bound for Tucson, and Mr. Xavier, who's keeping her safe on the journey." Mabel's shrewd eyes assessed them both. "Any friend of my brother's is welcome here," she said, though Nora sensed she was reserving judgment. "Come in and get washed up. Supper's almost ready." The inn was simple but immaculately clean, with polished wooden floors and calico curtains at the windows. Mabel showed them to a small dining room where several other guests were already seated. "I've only got one room available," she told them apologetically. "Two beds, though." Nora felt heat rise to her face. "Oh, but we're not. I'll sleep in the stable," Ethan said quickly. "I've bothered Miss Thatcher enough already." Mabel raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Suit yourself, though it seems a waste of a perfectly good bed." After a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Hollies invited Ethan to join the men for a smoke outside. Nora remained at the table, sipping tea and trying not to look as exhausted as she felt. "He's a good man, your Mr. Xavier," Mabel said, sliding into the chair Ethan had vacated. "Samuel told me what happened. Not many would spend their last dollar to help a stranger." "He's not my Mr. Xavier," Nora corrected gently. "But yes, he is a good man. I owe him my freedom, possibly my life." Mabel studied her with knowing eyes. "Life has a way of bringing people together out here for a reason. My late husband was passing through on his way to California when his horse went lame outside town. He stayed a week while the animal recovered. We were married before he left." "That's quite romantic," Nora said, unsure how to respond. 32 years together before pneumonia took him," Mabel continued. "Not a day I regretted. Sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the head catches up." She patted Nora's hand. "Get some rest, dear. You look dead on your feet." The room Mabel provided was small but comfortable, with a braided rug on the floor and a window overlooking the main street. Two narrow beds were separated by a nightstand with a ceramic washbasin and pitcher. Nora washed her face and hands, grateful for the clean water after days of trail dust. She was brushing out her long hair when a soft knock came at the door. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she opened it to find Ethan standing there, hat in hand. "Sorry to disturb you," he said, his eyes carefully averted from her loosened hair. "Hollies wanted me to tell you we'll be leaving at first light day after tomorrow. He's got deliveries to make here tomorrow, then we'll continue on to Tucson with the caravan." "Thank you for letting me know," she replied, suddenly conscious of her state of undress despite being fully covered. "And thank you again for everything you've done." Ethan nodded, still not quite meeting her eyes. "Sleep well, Miss Thatcher." As he turned to go, Nora impulsively reached out to touch his arm. "Ethan," she said softly, using his given name for the first time, "please be careful, those men. They might still be looking for us." His eyes finally met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "I won't let anything happen to you, Nora, I promise." For a moment, neither moved. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of feeling that neither was ready to acknowledge. Then Ethan stepped back, breaking the spell. "Good night," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "Good night," she whispered as he walked away. Nora closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. What was happening to her? She had come west to be a teacher, to build an independent life far from her father's new wife. Developing feelings for a penniless cowboy was not part of her plan. And yet, as she slipped beneath the clean sheets of the narrow bed, her thoughts remained fixed on green eyes and a quiet voice that promised protection. Sleep claimed her slowly, and when it did, her dreams were filled with dust and danger and a man who had spent his last dollar to set her free. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of another scorching day once the sun climbed higher. Nora rose early. Donning the clean dress Mabel had loaned her a simple blue calico that was a bit loose, but wonderfully fresh compared to the garment she'd been wearing for days. Downstairs, she found Ethan already at breakfast, deep in conversation with Samuel Hollies. Both men stood as she entered the dining room. "Good morning, Miss Thatcher," Ethan said, pulling out a chair for her. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted, accepting a cup of coffee from Mabel. "The bed felt like heaven after sleeping on the ground." "While you two break your fast," Holly said, "I'll be setting up my wares in the town square. Market day today, good timing for us." After he left, Nora and Ethan ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The dining room was empty except for them, the other guests having departed earlier. "Holly says the journey to Tucson will take another 4 days," Ethan finally said. "The terrain gets rougher, but traveling with the caravan will make it safer." Nora nodded, pushing her eggs around her plate. "I told Mabel I'd help with her accounts this morning to pay for our lodging, and I'll be helping Hollies unload his wagons." Ethan hesitated, then added, "I spoke with a man who arrived from Silver Creek last night. Harker and his men were seen heading north away from here. We might be in the clear." Relief flooded through Nora. "That's wonderful news." "Don't let your guard down too much," Ethan cautioned. "Men like that can change direction as quickly as the wind." After breakfast, they went their separate ways, Nora to the small office behind the inn's front desk, and Ethan to the town square where Hollies was setting up his goods. Mabel's accounting books were in surprisingly good order, though Nora found several arithmetic errors that had resulted in the innkeeper shortchanging herself. She worked steadily through the morning, enjoying the familiar comfort of numbers and ledgers. Around midday, Mabel brought her a sandwich and a glass of lemonade. "You're a godsend, Miss Thatcher," she said, peering at the corrected figures. "I've never had a head for numbers." "It's the least I could do after your hospitality," Nora replied. "Besides, it's nice to feel useful again." Mabel settled into a chair across from her. "Samuel tells me you're to be the new teacher in Tucson." "Yes, at the mission school. They're expanding their classes to include more settler children, not just the local Mexican families." "Noble work," Mabel nodded approvingly. "Though teaching has its hazards too. My first husband was a schoolmaster. Indians got him during the Troubles back in '59. Nora's hand froze midway to her glass. "I'm so sorry." Mabel waved away her sympathy. "Long time ago now. Point is, life out here can change in an instant. You need people you can depend on." She fixed Nora with a pointed look. "That cowboy of yours, he's the dependable sort." "He's not my cowboy," Nora protested, feeling her cheeks warm. "Hum," Mabel replied, clearly unconvinced. "Keep telling yourself that, dear. I saw how he looks at you and how you look at him when you think no one's watching." Before Nora could formulate a response, the door to the office burst open and Ethan appeared, his expression grave. "We need to go," he said without preamble. Now, Nora stood, alarmed by his tone. "What's happened?" Ryder just came in from the North Trail. "Harker and his men were spotted at a ranch about 10 miles from here, asking questions about us." His eyes met hers, serious and intent. "They're coming, Nora." Mabel rose with surprising speed for a woman of her size. "Samuel's wagons won't be ready to leave until tomorrow." "We can't wait," Ethan replied. "We need to go now, just the two of us." But Nora began. "I promised to keep you safe." Ethan cut her off. "And that's what I'm going to do." His determination brooked no argument. Nora nodded, gathering her few belongings while Mabel hurried to pack them food for the journey. Within 20 minutes, they were ready to depart. Ethan had retrieved his horse and purchased with money borrowed from Hollies a second mount for Nora, a gentle mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "Take the South Trail," Hollies advised as they prepared to ride out. "It's longer but less traveled. Harker will expect you to stay on the main road to Tucson." Ethan nodded, checking the cinch on Nora's saddle one last time. "We'll rejoin the main trail past Diablo Canyon if all goes well." "Godspeed," Mabel said, pressing a small package into Nora's hands. "Extra food and this." She tucked a small derringer into Nora's pocket. Never hurts for a woman to have protection of her own. Nora thanked her, touched by the older woman's concern. As they mounted their horses, Hollis approached Ethan. "When you reach the Circle P," he said quietly, "ask for Nathan Pierce. Tell him Samuel Hollis sent you, he'll see you right." Ethan clasped the trader's hand. "I'm in your debt." "Just get that girl safely to Tucson," Hollis replied. "That'll be payment enough." With final farewells, they rode out of Copper Springs, taking the narrow trail that wound south through increasingly rugged terrain. Nora, who had ridden only occasionally in Boston's parks, found herself struggling to adjust to the western saddle and the mare's gait. "You're doing fine," Ethan encouraged her, riding close enough to offer guidance. "Just relax your back and move with the horse." Gradually, she found her rhythm, and they made good time through the afternoon. The landscape grew more dramatic as they rode towering red rock formations, deep arroyos, and stands of juniper offering occasional shade. Despite the circumstances of their hasty departure, Nora found herself marveling at the wild beauty around them. "It's magnificent," she breathed during a brief stop to rest the horses. "So different from anything I've seen before." Ethan's expression softened as he looked at her. "The territory gets under your skin after a while, makes other places seem tame. Is that why you've stayed in the West?" She asked, accepting the canteen he offered. He considered the question, his gaze distant. "Partly. After the war, there wasn't much left for me back east. Out here, a man is judged by what he does, not who his family was or which side he fought for. Which side did you fight for?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "The losing one," he said simply. "Though some days it's hard to tell if anyone really won that war." The personal revelation, small as it was, felt significant. Ethan Xavier was a man who kept his own counsel, and each glimpse into his past seemed like a rare gift. They continued riding as the afternoon waned, pushing the horses as much as they dared. Ethan set a pace that was urgent but not reckless, clearly mindful of Nora's limited riding experience and the need to keep their mounts fresh. As dusk approached, he led them into a small box canyon where a spring bubbled up from among the rocks, creating a tiny oasis of greenery. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, helping Nora dismount. Her legs nearly buckled as she touched the ground. Unaccustomed to so many hours in the saddle, Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her. "Saddle sore?" he asked, his voice gentle. "A bit," she admitted, trying not to wince as she took a step. "It gets easier," he assured her. "Though you might not believe that tomorrow morning." Despite her discomfort, Nora insisted on helping set up their camp. She gathered firewood while Ethan tended to the horses, then unpacked the food Mabel had provided: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and jerky. As darkness fell, they sat beside a small fire, the canyon walls providing a sense of security after the exposed trail. Stars appeared overhead, countless and brilliant in the clear desert air. "You think we've lost them?" Nora asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Ethan's expression grew serious. "For now, maybe, but Harker strikes me as the persistent type. Why is he so determined? Surely there are other women he could pursue." The thought made her stomach turn. "It's not about you, not really," Ethan said, poking at the fire with a stick. "It's about his pride. I humiliated him in front of his men. Out here, reputation is currency. He can't let that stand." Nora wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "I've brought nothing but trouble to you." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Harker and men like him are the trouble. You're just trying to live your life, same as anyone." His defense warmed her more than the flames. "Still, you could have continued to Tucson without all this danger. Your job at the Circle P will still be there," he finished for her. "Nathan Pierce is a good man, according to Hollis. He'll understand the delay." The firelight cast Ethan's features into sharp relief, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the unexpected gentleness in his eyes. Not for the first time, Nora wondered about the experiences that had shaped him: the war, the loss of his brother, the years of drifting through the unforgiving West. "Why did you really help me that day at the auction?" she asked suddenly. "And don't say it was because of your mother." "That's part of it, I'm sure, but not all." Ethan was silent for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I was riding into town and I saw you on that platform. You were terrified anyone could see that, but there was something else. Dignity, maybe. You wouldn't look at the men bidding on you, wouldn't give them the satisfaction." He met her gaze across the fire. "I've seen that look before, in the war when men knew they were facing death but were determined to meet it on their own terms." Nora's throat tightened with emotion. "And then," Ethan continued, "when that man touched your hair and you pulled away, I knew I couldn't ride out of that town without doing something, even if it cost me everything I had." "It did cost you everything you had," she reminded him softly. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Best money I ever spent." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first encounter. Nora looked away first, overwhelmed by the intensity of his gaze and her own response to it. "We should get some rest," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Ethan nodded, rising to check on the horses one last time before settling his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. "Good night, Nora," he said quietly. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, wrapping herself in the blanket Mabel had provided. As she drifted toward sleep, Nora realized that for the first time since arriving in the West, she felt not just safe, but seen. In Ethan Xavier's eyes, she wasn't a commodity to be bought or sold, or even just a helpless Eastern woman in need of rescue. She was a person of value, worthy of respect and protection, and perhaps, she thought as sleep claimed her, worthy of something more. The next morning brought stiff muscles, and the realization that Ethan had been right. She believed even less today that riding would ever become comfortable. But there was no time to dwell on discomfort. After a quick breakfast of bread and jerky, they were back in the saddle, continuing their journey south. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as the day progressed. The trail narrowed, winding through steep walled canyons and across rocky plateaus where a single misstep by their horses could mean disaster. Ethan led the way, occasionally dismounting to check the path ahead or help Nora navigate a particularly difficult stretch. By midday, dark clouds were building on the horizon and a hot wind had begun to blow, carrying the scent of rain. "Storm coming," Ethan observed as they paused to rest in the shade of an overhanging cliff. "We need to find shelter before it hits." Nora eyed the threatening sky nervously. "How bad will it be?" Desert storms can be fierce but usually pass quickly. The real danger is flash floods. These canyons can fill with water in minutes. That sobering thought spurred them onward with renewed urgency. As the wind strengthened, they pushed their tired horses up a steep incline, emerging onto a high mesa that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding landscape. In the distance, Nora could see a vast expanse of desert stretching toward purple mountains. Closer, the land was a maze of canyons and buttes, sculpted by wind and water over countless millennia. There, Ethan pointed to a dark opening in a nearby cliff face. "Looks like a cave, should provide good shelter." They made their way carefully along the mesa's edge and down a narrow trail to the cave entrance. It proved to be deeper than it appeared from a distance, extending about 30 feet into the cliff. The floor was sandy and dry, with no sign of recent animal occupation. "This will do nicely," Ethan said, helping Nora dismount. "We can wait out the storm here." They had just finished bringing their gear inside when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle patter had become a downpour, a solid wall of water obscuring the view from the cave entrance. Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by deafening thunder that seemed to shake the very rock around them. "Impressive," Nora remarked, trying to sound calmer than she felt. Ethan smiled at her brave front. "Nature's artillery makes the cannons at Gettysburg seem like firecrackers." They settled deeper in the cave, spreading their bedrolls on the sandy floor. Ethan produced a small oil lamp from his saddlebags, and its warm glow created a cozy atmosphere despite the storm's fury outside. "No fire tonight, I'm afraid," he said, "but Mabel packed us some cold chicken that should make a decent meal." As they ate, the storm continued unabated, rain pounding the landscape and turning every depression into a flowing stream. Occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the cave entrance, providing glimpses of the transformed world outside. How long will it last? Nora asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the sudden chill the rain had brought. Hard to say, could be an hour, could be all night. Ethan leaned back against his saddle, stretching his long legs out before him. We're safe here, though, high enough to avoid any flooding. The enforced pause in their journey created an unexpected intimacy. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait, conversation came more easily than it had on the trail. Tell me about the school in Tucson, Ethan said. What will you be teaching? Nora's face lit up at the question. Everything, really. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, a bit of science. The children range from 6 to 16 years old and most have had little formal education. Sounds challenging. It will be, she acknowledged, but worthwhile. Education is the great equalizer, don't you think? It opens doors that might otherwise remain closed. My schooling ended when the war began, Ethan said, but I've tried to educate myself when possible. There's a lot to be learned from books, but even more from experience. What kind of books do you enjoy? Nora asked, genuinely curious about this aspect of him she hadn't expected. History, mostly, some poetry when I can get it. Whitman, Longfellow. The revelation of this softer side to the rugged cowboy touched her. I wouldn't have taken you for a poetry lover, Mr. Xavier. A hint of color appeared on his cheekbones. There's a lot you don't know about me, Miss Thatcher. I'd like to, she said softly, surprising herself with her boldness. Their eyes met across the small space, and something electric passed between them. The storm outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the flickering lamplight. Ethan looked away first, clearing his throat. We should get some rest. The storm might clear by morning, and we'll need to make up for lost time. Nora nodded, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment. She settled onto her bedroll, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Nora. Despite her physical exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. She was acutely aware of Ethan's presence just a few feet away, his breathing deep and regular but not yet the rhythm of sleep. The storm gradually diminished, the crashes of thunder becoming more distant, the rain softening to a gentle patter. Just as she was finally drifting off, a different sound jerked her fully awake, the distinctive click of a gun being cocked. Ethan was already on his feet, his revolver drawn, his body tense as he faced the cave entrance. Stay down, he whispered to Nora. She peered into the darkness beyond the lamp's glow. At first she saw nothing, but then a figure materialized at the cave entrance, a man, silhouetted against the rain-washed night. Well, ain't this cozy, drawled a familiar voice. Jeb Harker stepped into the circle of lamplight, water streaming from his hat and coat. Behind him, 2 more men appeared, their guns trained on Ethan. How did you find us? Ethan's voice was calm, but Nora could see the tension in his stance. Harker laughed. You ain't as clever as you think, Xavier. Taking the South Trail, first place I'd look for someone trying to avoid the main road. He shook water from his hat. Then the storm hit, and I figured you'd hole up somewhere. Saw your lamp from across the valley. Might as well have put up a sign. Nora slowly reached for the small derringer Mabel had given her, keeping the movement hidden beneath her blanket. What do you want, Harker? Ethan asked, though the answer was obvious. You know what I want. Harker's eyes fixed on Nora with a look that made her skin crawl. The girl was promised to me. I had a deal with Jenkins. She's not property, Ethan replied, his voice hard. She's a free woman on her way to take a teaching position in Tucson. Harker spat on the cave floor. Ain't no such thing as a free woman out here. Everyone belongs to someone. And she belongs to me. I belong to no one, Nora said, finding her voice at last. She sat up straighter, still keeping the derringer hidden. Certainly not to a man who would purchase another human being. Harker's face darkened with anger. Got a sharp tongue on you, don't she, Xavier? I'll enjoy taming that. You won't get the chance, Ethan said quietly. Walk away now, Harker. This doesn't have to end badly. One of Harker's men shifted nervously. Maybe we should go, Jeb. We're outnumbered in town, but not out here. We can take what we want and leave 'em for the buzzards. No one would ever know. The naked threat hung in the air like gunsmoke. Nora's hand tightened around the derringer, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Put down your gun, Xavier," Harker ordered. "Nice and slow." For a terrible moment, Nora thought Ethan might comply, might sacrifice himself in a futile attempt to save her. Instead, he shifted slightly, positioning himself more directly between her and the intruders. "Not going to happen," he said. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Ethan dove to the side as Harker fired, the bullet striking the cave wall behind where he had stood. In the same instant, Ethan's revolver barked twice, and one of Harker's men fell with a cry of pain. Nora raised the derringer and fired at the second man, missing him but causing enough distraction for Ethan to roll behind a boulder for cover. The confined space of the cave became a chaotic battlefield, with gunshots echoing deafeningly off the stone walls. Harker and his remaining man retreated toward the entrance, firing as they went. Ethan's steady return fire kept them from advancing again, creating a stalemate. "This ain't over, Xavier," Harker shouted from the darkness beyond the cave mouth. "You can't stay in there forever." "Neither can you stay out there," Ethan called back, "unless you fancy drowning in a flash flood." As if to punctuate his words, a distant rumbling sound reached them, water rushing down the canyons as the storm's runoff gathered force. "We'll be back when the water recedes," Harker promised. "And next time I won't be so sporting." Their footsteps retreated, barely audible over the sound of the rain and the growing roar of floodwater. Ethan waited several tense minutes before moving cautiously to check the wounded man Harker had left behind. "He's dead," he reported grimly. "Shot through the heart." Nora felt sick, though she knew the man would have shown no mercy had the situation been reversed. "Will they really come back?" "Maybe," Ethan said, reloading his revolver. "But they'll have to wait until the flooding subsides, same as us, and by then we'll be long gone." He moved to the cave entrance, peering out into the rain-lashed night. "The water's rising fast. They'll have to climb to higher ground or risk being swept away." Nora joined him, shocked by the transformation outside. What had been dry washes only hours before were now raging torrents, the landscape reshaping itself under the force of the water. "It's terrifying," she whispered. "And beautiful in a way." Ethan glanced at her, something like admiration in his eyes. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for, Nora Thatcher." "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "I'm frightened nearly all the time lately." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said quietly. "It's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the danger outside and the dead man in the cave seemed to fade away. There was only Ethan, his face half in shadow, looking at her as if she were something precious. Then the moment passed, and practicality reasserted itself. "We should try to get some rest," Ethan said. "We'll leave at first light before Harker can regroup." They moved the dead man's body to the far end of the cave, covering it with a blanket. There was no time for a proper burial, and the rising waters outside made it impossible anyway. Sleep came in fitful bursts for Nora, her mind replaying the violence she had witnessed. Each time she woke, she found Ethan awake and watchful, his gun close at hand. Dawn brought clearing skies and a landscape transformed by the storm's fury. The floodwaters had already begun to recede, leaving behind a muddy, debris-strewn terrain. "We'll have to be careful," Ethan said as they prepared to depart. "The ground will be treacherous, and there might be washouts on the trail." They left the cave cautiously, leading their horses down the slippery path to more stable ground below. There was no sign of Harker or his remaining man, but Ethan remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "You think they survived the flood?" Nora asked as they mounted their horses. "Hard to say," Ethan replied. "Depends on where they took shelter, but Harker strikes me as the type that's hard to kill." They rode through a landscape both familiar and alien, familiar in its basic contours but altered by the storm's passage. New gullies had been carved into the earth, boulders shifted, trees uprooted. Their progress was slow, the horses picking their way carefully through the changed terrain. By midday, they had reached a high ridge that offered a view of the country ahead. In the distance, a ribbon of green marked the course of the San Pedro River, and beyond it, the mountains that sheltered Tucson. "We're making good time, despite everything," Ethan said. "Another day and a half of hard riding should get us there." The realization that their journey was nearing its end brought Nora a strange mixture of relief and regret. Relief that the dangers of the trail would soon be behind them, but regret that her time with Ethan was drawing to a close. "What will you do after you deliver me to Tucson?" she asked as they continued their descent from the ridge. Ethan adjusted his hat against the strengthening sun. "Head to the Circle P like I planned. It's a good opportunity foreman position, decent pay." "It sounds perfect for you," Nora said, trying to sound enthusiastic despite the hollow feeling in her chest. "And you'll be teaching," he said, "shaping young minds like you wanted." "Yes," she agreed, "it's what I came west for after all." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The events of the past few days had created a bond between them that went beyond rescuer and rescued, but neither seemed ready to put a name to it or explore what it might mean for their futures. As afternoon waned, they made camp in a small grove of cottonwoods beside a stream swollen by the recent rain. The trees provided welcome shade and a sense of security after the exposed trail. While Ethan tended to the horses, Nora gathered wood for a fire. The domestic task felt almost normal, as if they were an ordinary couple setting up camp after a day's journey rather than fugitives fleeing a determined enemy. The thought brought a flush to her cheeks. She had no right to imagine such things. Ethan had helped her out of a sense of decency, not because of any personal feelings. The fact that her own heart raced whenever he was near was her problem, not his. Yet she couldn't help noticing the way his eyes followed her movements, or how his hand lingered when he helped her mount her horse. Were these signs of something more, or merely the protective instincts of a good man? As darkness fell, they sat beside the fire, sharing the last of the food Mabel had provided. Tomorrow they would need to hunt or fish to supplement their dwindling supplies. "Do you ever think about settling down?" Nora asked suddenly, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Ethan looked up from the fire, his expression thoughtful. "I have lately." "What would that look like for you? A ranch of your own?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe a piece of land, some cattle, a decent house." His eyes met hers across the flames. Someone to share it with. Nora's heart skipped a beat at the intensity in his gaze. "I thought cowboys preferred their freedom." "Some do," he acknowledged, "but freedom can be a lonely thing after a while. Especially when you find something or someone worth staying in one place for." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Nora found herself leaning slightly forward, drawn by a force as inevitable as gravity. A sudden noise from the darkness beyond their camp shattered the moment. Ethan was on his feet instantly, gun in hand. "What was that?" Nora whispered, fear replacing the warmth that had been building inside her. Ethan shook his head, signaling for silence. They waited, tense and still, as seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, a deer emerged from the underbrush, regarding them with liquid eyes before bounding away. The tension broke, and they both laughed with relief. "Just dinner getting away," Ethan said, holstering his weapon. But the interruption had broken the spell of their earlier conversation, and neither seemed able to find the way back to it. They spoke instead of practical matters, the route they would take tomorrow, the likelihood of reaching Tucson before their supplies ran out completely. As they prepared for sleep, Ethan insisted on taking the first watch, despite Nora's protests that he needed rest as much as she did. "I'll wake you in a few hours," he promised, settling against a tree trunk with his rifle across his knees. Nora lay down on her bedroll, watching the play of firelight across his features. In that moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she had planned, not a schoolroom in Tucson, but a ranch somewhere, with cattle on the hills and children playing in the yard. And Ethan, coming home to her at the end of each day, his smile reserved for her alone. It was a lovely dream, but perhaps that's all it was, a dream born of danger and proximity, destined to fade once they reached civilization. With that sobering thought, she closed her eyes and surrendered to exhaustion, She woke to Ethan's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent in her ear. "Riders coming," he whispered. "3 of them moving fast." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Nora sat up quickly, reaching for her boots. "Harker," she asked, fear constricting her throat. "Can't tell yet, but we need to move now." They packed with practiced efficiency, erasing all signs of their camp in minutes. The horses sensed their urgency, dancing nervously as they were saddled. "There's a canyon about a mile ahead," Ethan said as he helped Nora mount. "Narrow entrance, easily defended, we'll make for that." They rode out just as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Ethan set a hard pace, pushing their mounts as fast as he dared on the still treacherous ground. The sound of pursuit grew closer, hoofbeats pounding the earth, voices calling to each other. Nora risked a glance back and saw 3 riders silhouetted against the rising sun, closing the distance rapidly. "It's Harker," Ethan confirmed grimly. "He survived the flood and found reinforcements." They reached the canyon entrance with barely 100 yards to spare. Ethan helped Nora dismount and led both horses deeper into the narrow passage, where the walls rose 50 feet on either side, creating a natural fortress. "Stay with the horses," he instructed, positioning her behind a large boulder. "I'll hold them off at the entrance." "Ethan, no," she protested. "There are 3 of them." He checked his revolver, making sure each chamber was loaded. "The canyon narrows their approach. They can only come at me one at a time." Before she could argue further, he was moving back toward the canyon mouth, taking position behind a fallen tree that offered both cover and a clear line of fire to the entrance. Harker and his men arrived moments later, pulling up short when they saw the defensive position Ethan had taken. "Give it up, Xavier," Harker called. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Hand over the woman and you can ride away free and clear." "Not going to happen, Harker," Ethan shouted back. "Last chance to walk away from this." Harker's response was to fire his rifle, the bullet splintering wood from the fallen tree inches from Ethan's head. The battle was joined. From her position deeper in the canyon, Nora could see only flashes of the conflict muzzle flare in the early morning light, dust kicked up by bullets striking earth and stone. The sound was deafening, magnified by the canyon walls until it seemed like an entire army was engaged in combat. She clutched the derringer, knowing it would be of little use at this distance, but determined to defend herself if the worst happened. The horses shifted nervously behind her, frightened by the gunfire. The shooting continued for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes. Then a different sound reached her men's voices, raised in anger and alarm. A final fusillade of shots, then silence. Nora held her breath, straining to hear any sign of who had prevailed. The silence stretched, broken only by a distant bird call and the soft nickering of the horses. Then footsteps approached, slow and measured. Nora raised the derringer, her hand shaking as she aimed at the bend in the canyon where the newcomer would appear. Ethan emerged from around the rock face, his shirt bloodied, a fresh cut along his cheekbone, but very much alive. Nora dropped the derringer and ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck in a display of emotion that would have scandalized her Boston acquaintances. "You're alive," she breathed, pulling back to examine his injuries. "Are you badly hurt?" He shook his head, wincing slightly. "Bullet grazed my side, nothing serious." "And Harker, dead," Ethan said simply. Along with one of his men, the 3rd ran off. Nora helped him to a sitting position against the canyon wall and insisted on examining his wound. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, tearing a furrow along his ribs that bled freely but wasn't life-threatening. She tore strips from her petticoat to bandage the injury, working efficiently despite her lack of medical experience. Ethan watched her with a mixture of pain and something warmer in his eyes. "You'd make a good doctor," he remarked as she tied off the bandage. "I'd rather be a teacher," she replied, though her hands lingered on his skin longer than strictly necessary. "Less blood involved." He caught her hand as she withdrew it, holding it gently in his larger one. "Nora," he began, then seemed to struggle for words. "Yes," she prompted, her heart beating faster at the look in his eyes. but whatever he had been about to say remained unspoken. The sound of more riders approaching echoed through the canyon, and Ethan was immediately alert, reaching for his revolver despite his injury. "Stay behind me," he ordered, struggling to his feet. Before he could take position, however, a familiar voice called out, "Xavier, Miss Thatcher." "You in there?" "Samuel Hollies," Nora called back, hardly believing their luck. The traitor appeared at the canyon entrance, mounted on his sturdy mule with 3 armed men behind him. He surveyed the scene, the bodies of Harker and his man lying in the dust, Ethan's bloody bandage, Nora's disheveled appearance. "Looks like we missed the excitement," he observed dryly. "Though I can't say I'm sorry about that." Relief washed over Nora in a dizzying wave. "How did you find us?" "Followed your trail from Copper Springs," Hollies explained, dismounting with a grunt. "Figured you might need some help after that storm. Seems I was right, though a bit late." One of the men with Hollies examined Harker's body. "This fella's been causing trouble all over the territory," he reported. "There's a reward for him in Tucson." "Reward's yours," Ethan said immediately. "I just wanted him off our trail." Hollies approached, concern evident as he noted Ethan's injury. "You need a doctor, son." "What I need is to get Miss Thatcher safely to Tucson," Ethan replied stubbornly. "We're less than a day's ride away now, and in no condition to make it alone," Hollies countered. "Lucky for you, we're headed that way ourselves. You two can ride with us." Too exhausted and relieved to argue, Ethan and Nora accepted the offer. While Hollies' men dealt with the bodies, loading Harker's remains onto a pack mule for the reward, Nora helped Ethan mount his horse. "You never finished what you were going to say," she reminded him quietly. Before Hollies arrived, Ethan looked down at her, his expression softening. "It'll keep until Tucson," he said. "Some conversations deserve better circumstances than a canyon with dead men for company." The promise in his voice warmed her through, making the final leg of their journey seem both too long and not long enough. Whatever waited for them in Tucson, whatever future they might or might not have together, would be decided soon. The small caravan made good time, benefiting from Hollies' knowledge of the territory and the additional security of numbers. They forded the San Pedro River by mid-afternoon and began the final approach to Tucson as the sun started its descent toward the western horizon. Tucson appeared first as a smudge on the landscape, then gradually resolved into a proper town larger than Silver Creek or Copper Springs, with adobe buildings glowing golden in the late afternoon light. The mission San Xavier del Bac stood on a hill above the settlement, its white towers a beacon guiding them home. As they rode into town, Nora felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief at reaching their destination safely, anticipation of beginning her new life as a teacher, and a growing sadness at the thought of parting from Ethan. They stopped first at the sheriff's office to report Harker's death and collect the reward money, which Hollies insisted on sharing with Ethan despite his protests. "You earned it, son," the trader said firmly. "Use it to get a fresh start at the Circle P." Their next stop was the mission school, where Nora was to take up her position. The school building stood adjacent to the main mission, a simple adobe structure with a bell tower and a small courtyard. A few children played there under the watchful eye of an elderly nun. Nora's heart sank as she realized the moment of parting had arrived. She turned to Ethan, who had dismounted despite his injury and stood beside her horse, looking up at her with an unreadable expression. "This is it," she said softly. "The end of our journey." "One journey," he corrected. "Not all journeys." Before she could respond, the mission door opened, and a dignified older woman in a simple dark dress emerged. She approached them with a warm smile. "You must be Miss Thatcher," she said. "I am Mrs. Diaz, the headmistress. We had begun to worry when you didn't arrive on the scheduled stagecoach." "There were complications," Nora explained, dismounting with Ethan's help. "This is Mr. Xavier. He helped me reach Tucson safely." Mrs. Diaz's shrewd eyes took in Ethan's bandaged side and their trail-worn appearance. "I see," she said. "It seems you have quite a story to tell. It's been an eventful journey," Nora agreed. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters. The children are eager to meet their new teacher." Mrs. Diaz turned to Ethan. And you, Mr. Xavier, will you be staying in Tucson? Ethan shook his head. I have a position waiting at the Circle P Ranch, Mrs. Diaz nodded. Nathan Pierce's place, a fine establishment about 10 miles north of town. Nora felt her spirits lift slightly at this news. 10 miles wasn't so very far, especially in this vast territory where people thought nothing of riding for days to reach a neighbor. You should have that wound properly tended before you ride out again, Mrs. Diaz continued, practical and observant. Our mission doctor is excellent. Thank you, madam, but I should be moving on, Ethan demurred. Hollis, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. The Circle P will keep for another day, Xavier. Get yourself patched up proper before you report for duty. After some persuasion, Ethan agreed to see the doctor. While he was being treated, Mrs. Diaz showed Nora to her quarters, a small but comfortable room within the school building, with a narrow bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the courtyard. The children are boarders, mostly, Mrs. Diaz explained. Orphans or from families too remote to travel daily. You'll have 20 pupils to start, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Nora listened attentively, trying to focus on her new responsibilities rather than the man being treated in another part of the mission. This was what she had come west for, a chance to make a difference, to build a new life on her own terms. Yet, as Mrs. Diaz outlined the school's curriculum and schedule, Nora found her thoughts drifting repeatedly to Ethan. In the space of a few extraordinary days, he had become more important to her than she could have imagined possible. The prospect of him riding away to the Circle P, out of her life perhaps forever, was increasingly unbearable. When Mrs. Diaz finally left her to rest and refresh herself, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the tumult of her emotions. A knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Diaz with more information about her duties. Instead, Ethan entered, his side properly bandaged now, his face cleaned of trail dust. He had even managed to shave, revealing the strong line of his jaw and making him look younger, less weathered by the harshness of frontier life. "The doctor says I'll live," he said with a hint of a smile. "Though I'm under strict orders not to engage in any gunfights for at least a week." Nora laughed despite the tightness in her throat. Sage advice. He closed the door behind him and stood somewhat awkwardly in the small room, hat in hand. "I came to say goodbye. Hollis is heading out and I thought I'd ride with him as far as the Circle P turnoff." "Oh," the single syllable was all she could manage past the sudden constriction in her chest. Ethan took a step closer. "Nora, what I was trying to say back in the canyon." "Yes." She prompted when he hesitated. He took a deep breath. "I've been drifting for years, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots, but these past few days with you, they've changed something in me." Hope bloomed in Nora's heart, fragile but undeniable. "I can't offer you much," he continued. "The Circle P job pays well, but I'm still just a cowboy with empty pockets and too many hard miles behind him." "Ethan," she began, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I need to say this while I have the courage." His green eyes held hers, sincere and vulnerable. "I know you came west to be independent, to build a life on your own terms, and I respect that more than I can say, but if there's any chance that life might have room in it for me." Nora crossed the small space between them, placed her hands on his chest, and rose on tiptoe to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Ethan's arms encircled her, pulling her close as if he never intended to let go. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Nora smiled up at him. "Does that answer your question, Mr. Xavier?" A slow smile transformed his face, erasing the last traces of the hard-eyed stranger who had rescued her from the auction block. "It's a start, Miss Thatcher." 10 miles isn't so very far," she mused, still held securely in his arms. "I could ride out to the Circle P on weekends, or you could come to town." "I was thinking of something more permanent," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "The Circle P has a small house for the foreman. It's nothing fancy, but it could be a home, our home if you wanted. Are you proposing, Ethan Xavier?" Nora asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Inelegantly, but yes." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. I know it's sudden. We've only known each other a few days, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Nora's mind raced. It was sudden, bordering on reckless. Her Boston acquaintances would be scandalized by a proposal after so short an acquaintance. Yet hadn't she come west precisely to escape those rigid social conventions? And in those few days, hadn't she seen Ethan's character tested in ways that revealed his true nature more clearly than years of polite courtship ever could? Yes, she said simply. Ethan blinked as if he hadn't quite expected that response. Yes, I'll marry you, Nora clarified, laughing at his stunned expression. Though I intend to continue teaching, at least until we start a family of our own. Joy blazed across his features. I wouldn't have it any other way. He pulled her close again, sealing their agreement with another kiss that promised a lifetime of shared adventures. A discreet cough from the doorway startled them apart. Mrs. Diaz stood there, eyebrows raised but a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I see you've decided to accept Mr. Xavier's proposal, she observed dryly. How convenient that Father Ignacio is in residence this week. Nora blushed furiously. Mrs. Diaz, the older woman, waved away her explanation. My dear, I was young once too, believe it or not. And it's clear to anyone with eyes that you two belong together. Her expression softened. Life is too short and too uncertain in this territory to delay happiness when you find it. Does this mean I still have a position at the school? Nora asked hesitantly. Of course, Mrs. Diaz assured her. Though we may need to arrange for transportation between here and the Circle P, she fixed Ethan with a stern look. I trust you'll see that she arrives safely for her classes, Mr. Xavier. Yes, madam, he replied seriously. Every day, rain or shine. Good. Now I believe Mr. Hollies is waiting for you. You should inform him of the change in plans. With that, she withdrew, leaving them alone once more. Ethan took Nora's hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I'll go speak with Hollies. And then I'll ride to the Circle P to arrange things with Nathan Pierce. I can be back by tomorrow evening. And then, Nora asked, still scarcely believing the sudden turn her life had taken. His smile was tender and full of promise. And then we begin our life together, if that's what you want. It is, she assured him. More than anything. They walked hand in hand to the mission courtyard where Samuel Hollies waited with barely concealed impatience. His expression shifted from irritation to knowing amusement as he took in their clasped hands and radiant faces. Well, he drawled. I see some decisions have been made while I've been cooling my heels out here. Hollies, I need a favor, Ethan said. I need to get to the Circle P to speak with Nathan Pierce, then back here by tomorrow evening, the trader chuckled. For a wedding, I presume. Nora blushed again, but Ethan just grinned. News travels fast. Small town, Hollies shrugged, and Mrs. Diaz has a loud voice when she's excited. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. Come on then, daylight's wasting and you've got important business to attend to. The parting, though temporary, was still difficult. Ethan held Nora close, reluctant to let go even for a day. I'll be back before you know it, he promised, pressing a final kiss to her forehead. I'll be waiting, she replied. I have a wedding dress to arrange after all. As she watched him ride away with Hollies, Nora felt none of the uncertainty that had plagued her throughout their journey. This was right, unexpected and unconventional, perhaps, but undeniably right. She turned back toward the mission school, where her new life waited. Tomorrow she would meet her students, begin her work as a teacher. And tomorrow evening, Ethan would return, bringing with him the promise of a shared future. A future that had begun with an auction. A few coins and a cowboy's last dollar, spent on something beyond price, the freedom that had led, against all odds, to love. True to his word, Ethan returned the following evening. Nora was in the courtyard, helping one of her younger students master the alphabet, when the sound of hoofbeats announced his arrival. The little girl giggled at the way Nora's face lit up. Is that your sweetheart, Miss Thatcher? She asked innocently. Yes, Maria, he is, Nora replied, unable to suppress her smile as Ethan dismounted and removed his hat. He was dressed in clean clothes likely borrowed from Nathan Pierce and had made an effort to tame his usually wild hair. how was your first day of teaching?" He asked, approaching with the slightly hesitant air of a man still uncertain of his welcome. "Wonderful," she answered truthfully. "The children are eager to learn, and Mrs. Diaz is an excellent mentor." Maria tugged at Nora's skirt. "Are you going to kiss him?" she whispered loudly. Ethan's lips twitched with suppressed laughter. "Perhaps later," he told the child solemnly, "when we have fewer spectators." This earned him a giggle from Maria and an approving nod from Mrs. Diaz, who had emerged from the school building to witness the reunion. "Mr. Xavier," the headmistress greeted him, "I trust your business at the Circle P was concluded satisfactorily." "Yes, madam," he replied. "Mr. Pierce was very understanding. He's agreed to let me use the foreman's house immediately and has given me 3 days leave for personal matters." A hint of color touched his cheekbones. "Excellent," Mrs. Diaz said briskly. "Father Ignacio is expecting you both in an hour. I've taken the liberty of arranging a small celebration afterward." As the headmistress ushered Maria inside for supper, Ethan finally took Nora's hands in his. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "It's not too late to change your mind. No one would blame you for wanting more time." Nora squeezed his hands reassuringly. "I've never been more certain of anything, unless—" a flicker of doubt crossed her face, "unless you're having second thoughts." "Not a chance," he said firmly. "I just want to be sure you won't regret marrying a man you've known less than a week." "In that week, I've seen your courage, your integrity, and your heart," she replied. "Some people could be married for decades and never truly know each other as well as we do." His expression softened. "When you put it that way. Besides," she added with a mischievous smile, "you spent your last dollar on me. I'm just making sure you get your money's worth." Ethan laughed, pulling her into an embrace that defied propriety but felt entirely right. "Best investment I ever made," he murmured against her hair. An hour later, they stood before Father Ignacio in the simple mission chapel. Nora wore a dress borrowed from one of the teacher's ivory silk with delicate embroidery, slightly too large but pinned skillfully by Mrs. Diaz to fit her slender frame. Wildflowers gathered by the schoolchildren formed her bouquet. Ethan, standing tall and solemn in his borrowed suit, looked at her as if she were the most precious sight he had ever beheld. When he spoke his vows, his voice was clear and unwavering, his green eyes never leaving hers. "I, Ethan James Xavier, take thee, Nora Elizabeth Thatcher, to be my lawfully wedded wife." The words, ancient and familiar, took on new meaning in this place, spoken by this man who had risked everything to save her. Nora's own voice trembled slightly as she made her responses, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. Samuel Hollis served as witness, beaming like a proud father. Mrs. Diaz dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while the schoolchildren watched wide-eyed from the back of the chapel, having been granted special permission to attend. When Father Ignacio pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. As they turned to face their small audience, Nora felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the uncertainty and danger that had marked the beginning of their relationship. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, a meal prepared by the mission cooks, music provided by a local guitarist, and dancing in the courtyard under strings of paper lanterns. Nora found herself passed from partner to partner as the townspeople welcomed her into their community, but her eyes constantly sought out Ethan, who watched her with undisguised adoration. When they finally slipped away, it was to a small but charming room at Tuckson's Best Hotel, a wedding gift from Nathan Pierce, delivered via a message from the Circle P. "Your new employer seems very understanding," Nora remarked as Ethan closed the door behind them. "He's a good man," Ethan agreed. "Said he'd been expecting me to show up with a bride ever since Hollis sent word ahead about my heroic rescue of a beautiful schoolteacher." Nora laughed. "Hollis does have a flair for storytelling. In this case, he didn't need to embellish much." Ethan drew her into his arms. The truth was dramatic enough. As night deepened around them, they discovered each other anew, not as rescuer and rescued, but as husband and wife, equal partners in the life they were beginning together. Later, lying in the circle of Ethan's arms, Nora marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. If the stagecoach hadn't been robbed, if I hadn't been stranded in Silver Creek, if you hadn't ridden into town that particular day. If I hadn't spent my last dollar freeing a stubborn, beautiful woman from an auction block, Ethan added, pressing a kiss to her temple. Do you ever regret it? She asked, suddenly curious. Giving up everything you had for a stranger. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with tender seriousness. Nora Xavier, I would spend my last dollar 1,000 times over to end up exactly where I am right now. The sentiment, simply stated but profound in its meaning, brought tears to her eyes. I love you, Ethan Xavier, she whispered, the words new but feeling as natural as breathing. And I love you, he replied, gathering her close once more. More than I ever thought possible. In the years that followed, their love only deepened. Nora continued teaching at the mission school, earning a reputation as one of the territory's finest educators. Ethan thrived as foreman of the Circle P, eventually buying a small parcel of land adjacent to the ranch where they built a home of their own. Their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Ethan's mother, was born 2 years after their wedding. A son, James, followed 3 years later. Both children inherited their father's green eyes and their mother's love of learning. The schoolchildren of Tucson grew accustomed to the sight of Mr. Xavier arriving to escort his wife home each afternoon, his once empty pockets now containing treasures for his children, and the same watch he had sold to pay for the final portion of Nora's freedom so many years before. The watch had been a wedding gift from Samuel Holly's, who remained a frequent visitor to their home until his peaceful passing at the age of 82. His sister Mabel attended both children's baptisms and never failed to remind everyone that she had predicted the match from the beginning. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Nora with a locket to replace the one stolen during the stagecoach robbery. Inside was not a portrait, as was traditional, but a single coin, a reminder of the auction that had brought them together. To think, Nora mused as they sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. All of this began because I was auctioned for a few coins in tears, and you paid your last dollar and said she's mine now. Ethan took her hand, his touch as familiar and essential as her own heartbeat. I may have said those words, he replied, but you were never mine to own. You were always your own woman, Nora. I just had the incredible good fortune to become the man you chose to love. The setting sun bathed them in golden light, much as it had on that fateful evening in Silver Creek. But now, instead of fear and uncertainty, it illuminated the contentment of two people who had found in each other not possession, but partnership, not ownership, but the freedom that comes from being truly, deeply loved.